Guts' Berserker Armor is without question one of the most appealing and mysterious power-ups there are in anime and manga. It's just quite obvious that Miura has used a lot of inspiration from these psychologists to develop things in Berserk like the collective unconscious, the idea of evil. Griffith as a character is heavily based on the psychoanalysts, and I made an entire video on Griffith and Guts separately on Jung's works, but you get the point. Berserk is heavily based off of psychology and psychoanalysts from the 19th and 20th centuries. I've talked a lot about these people, so I'm not going to go into it today. We're just going to talk about the Berserker Armor and how incredible it really is, and trying to explain everything we sort of know about this power-up so far. This is important because the Berserker Armor, as we know, makes up a large portion of Guts' character, and it gets introduced at a time where Guts is heavily drunk on revenge, and anything he can do to get revenge he's going to do, which is very interesting because that's when the Berserker Armor decides to take over Guts, and that's where it begins to manifest itself, where Guts needs the rage, the malice, and the emotional drive the most. And that's the reason why we don't see the Berserker Armor in the Golden Age arc. It's because Guts isn't driven by malice and emotions. He hasn't experienced the traumatic events of the eclipse, which is the thing that initially kickstarted the development of the Beast of Darkness. If it hasn't been apparent already, I'm going to refer to the Beast of Darkness and the Berserker Armor synonymously, because whilst they are two different things, the Berserker Armor kind of acts as the home for the Beast of Darkness, and the Beast of Darkness is what makes the Berserker Armor so dangerous and so uncontrollable. This Berserker Armor dives into the deep biochemical urges that make up the human psyche and resembles the sinful part of the human mind, that being the reliance on emotions and committing sinful acts in order to get what you want. Griffith clearly committed sinful acts to get what he wanted, and Guts, using the Berserker Armor, is able to do things that he otherwise wouldn't do based on his drive to get revenge and his anger for Griffith. And that is exactly what the Berserker Armor is trying to do to Guts the entire story of Berserk. In us humans, we have what I'm going to call in this video, for the lack of a galaxy brain term, the animal brain. I guess you could call it the emotional brain, but I'm going to call it the animal brain. Kind of like the lizard brain that just makes stupid decisions and completely changes up your emotions for no reason. Emotions in humans are actually just biochemical algorithms created by the brain over millions and millions of years of evolution in order for the human, or I guess the self, to make decisions based on the answers to these chemical algorithms. Let's consider the algorithm to be something like an equation, because that's what it is. The answer to these mathematical equations are not numbers. It's not 2. It's not 936,421. It is the emotion that you feel. Once the biochemical algorithm gives you an answer, you feel the emotion based on that answer. But what the Berserker Armor does is it completely cancels all these biochemical algorithms and gives Guts the anger and the malice that he needs to go after Griffith. When the Berserker Armor realizes that Guts is in control of himself and is down the path of protecting Casca, it is the strongest. It is when it manifests itself the most, and it is when it takes over Guts. We see this in the Winter Journey chapters, where Guts seems to be taking care of Casca nice and peacefully, but the Berserker Armor swoops in and does some crazy, unimaginable things that Guts himself cannot even comprehend. The Berserker Armor supplies Guts with the malice and the anger he needs to take revenge for Griffith, and it's an excuse to take revenge for Griffith, because what the Berserker Armor is really doing is fueling Guts with anger so he can become stronger by sacrificing Casca and by killing Griffith. It's the hunger for power that the Berserker Armor wants, and it represents humanity very well. But Guts, being the Chad that he is, struggles forward and continues down his own path. That's what makes him so appealing. That's just a small part of what makes him so appealing. What really made me want to make this video is the interaction between Guts and Griffith in chapters 365 and 366. What was really interesting about these chapters was that Guts' Berserker Armor did not take over him, and he did not use it to fight Griffith. I was thinking about this for some time, and now I think I've developed quite a decent theory on the matter. So the Berserker Armor gets triggered whenever Guts hears about Griffith, or whenever Guts is in Griffith's presence, as we see here. The Berserker Armor crawls up on Guts' back, but the interesting thing is it doesn't take over him. Now, why I think this happened is because when Guts himself is angry and rages at what's initiating his anger, which is in this case Griffith, the Berserker Armor does not need to activate, theoretically, because Guts himself is driven by the anger. And as I mentioned before, the Berserker Armor is primarily there to drive Guts into facing Griffith and defeating him and becoming more powerful. But when Guts is doing that himself, when he pushes himself into fighting Griffith without the use of the Berserker Armor, there is no purpose purpose of that malice being hidden down inside of him. You can consider the Berserker Armor to be Guts' hidden malice and Guts' hidden anger and drive to take down Griffith. He continuously shuts the gate between him and that emotion being the Berserker Armor. The more he shuts it down, the more the Berserker Armor bangs on that door and is trying to get loose and trying to take over Guts. And again, we see this in the Winter Journey. He seals away the Berserker Armor and it only comes back stronger and stronger. However, when he lets his own anger loose here against Griffith, the Berserker Armor has no use, and so Guts does not use the Berserker Armor. He doesn't control it. The armor just simply does not take over him because he has enough anger and malice to fight Griffith in this situation. Now, I know this might sound kind of paradoxical, but it makes sense in actuality. This armor feeds off the malice and hatred that Guts hides within him when it's buried deep in Guts' unconscious mind. So this is what Guts did when he wasn't pursuing Griffith, and as I mentioned, this armor primarily manifested itself when Guts was trying to save Casca, and it's what drove Guts into doing some, but again, when Guts completes his goal of protecting Casca, which he does end up doing on Elfhelm, the Berserker Armor has nothing to feed off of because Guts' malice is being let loose. The Berserker Armor is still able to come out as we have seen, but Guts will only be truly taken over by it if his own malice doesn't match that of the Berserker itself. The anger that Guts gets in the moment he sees Griffith is enough to fuel himself, and so the Berserker Armor, as I mentioned, it doesn't need to be activated. But it can still come out, and this is shown, I think it was chapter 362 or 363, where Guts' Berserker Armor comes out almost immediately and he sees the memory of the past eclipse. The Beast of Darkness was initially born from Guts' traumatic experiences from the eclipse, and after Guts' conviction to take down Griffith, it slowly began to manifest itself. I should say it's when Guts was convicted to bring Casca back, not when he was chasing after Griffith. And because this Beast of Darkness functions off rage, or off the emotions that Guts feels, which are primarily rage, and it represents humanity in the way that it tries to degrade Guts and force him onto a path where his emotions can take over. Much like in humans, many urges and biochemical urges force us to follow our emotions and act emotionally as opposed to controlling and better utilizing our emotions. That's another lesson that Berserk is trying to teach us. The beauty of the Berserker Armor is that it's not a dramatic power-up earned from hard work or training. It came from trauma and crazy otherworldly experiences. It's not a reward for training hard like Sage Mode or like the final Getsuga Tensho, you know what I'm saying? It's something that came from trauma. It's something that came from a terrible experience. It's not a reward by any means. In fact, it is quite the opposite, because despite being an incredible power-up, it has so many detrimental downsides. And what I just realized is that the Berserker Armor is sort of like a mini Beyblade if you think about it. It sacrifices your body and your senses in order for you to have temporary power. It's sort of what the Beyblade does, except the Beyblade sacrifices your humanity and your soul so you can get power. They are very similar in that regard, however, and it's sort of a power-up that doesn't make Guts really feel like the good guy. It doesn't make him feel like that heroic protagonist. It makes him feel sort of like a villainous character and a villainous edgelord, despite Guts not being that towards the end of the story or where the story is currently ongoing right now. As we know, Guts has become much more of a kind person, but he still has this side to deal with, and he still has these emotions he's constantly burdened by. That is the true beauty of the Berserker Armor. Guts constantly has to fight off the urge exerted by the Berserker Armor, and many times he fails. We see this so many times, and Shirka saves Guts' life just so many different times. It presents Guts with another obstacle which only increases the appeal of this brilliant power-up. It makes the Berserker Armor even better by presenting Guts with another obstacle, even though he's had way too many. Like, my boy needs a break. Without question, this is one of the greatest power-ups ever. The Berserker Armor is truly a masterful power-up. It is so incredibly detailed and layered. Truly, Miura knew what he was doing when he was writing this, and he gave us one of the most memorable and appealing power-ups ever. But what's more fascinating is the like button on this video and the subscribe button. Both of these things just look absolutely beautiful, and if you were to click on them,